gross scheduled is the rent that the leases say we're collecting, which could be less than the market. You know, you think about it, you got one unit left to rent, and you're renting them for $1,000, and it's Friday afternoon. And if you rent one more unit, you get to go home at 100% occupancy. And some guy walks through the door and says, "Hey, you got any units? I got one left. How much?" It's $1,000 a month. My budget's 900. I tell you what, I'll sell it to you for 900. That's the scheduled rent. You just gave away $100 a month. And the accountants step back and say, whoa, 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 whoa. We've got to account for that $100. Well, where do you account for it? You account for it in a category called loss to lease. That $100 now drops your gross potential rent down to your gross scheduled rent of $900. And that is the next starting point as we get down to that gross collected. Now, why is that number important? Because if you're looking at a multifamily property and you look at that loss to lease number, the thing you want to think about is if it's 3% or less, that's a well-run property. That's a well-run property. If the loss to lease is up to the 10% range, meaning you're giving away 10% of your rent just to keep people in there, that property has a problem. Now, you might think to yourself that, oh, all I got to do is get in there and I'll start bumping the rents up to market and I can increase the NOI by 10% overnight. Yeah, they can tell you just graduated from someone's boot camp, because that's not the way it works. Yes, you do want to drive the rents and get them up there. But if you do that in one fell swoop, you're going to have a lot of people moving out on you. Your turnover costs are going to go up. Your vacancy is going to increase. And those are all other categories that we need to account for because of your actions by bumping the rents up 10%. You see how this is working? All of these numbers all work and interact together. And you've got to know how to manage around them to get that property to its potential. So when we look at the loss to lease, I look at it and I think, okay, it's about 3%. I'm going to bump it 3%. So I don't have a whole lot of room in a value play there. But the other flip to the side is if it's got 10% and some new investor comes to me and says, "Hey, want to invest in my property? Everybody's got below market rents. It's 10% below market. We're going to bump them up and the number's going to look great. And this is how much we're going to make." I say to them, "Show me your financials." And he hands me his pro forma financials. And I look on the sheet and he hasn't accounted for turnover costs. His vacancy is still like 3%, some crazy number. And I ask him, how do you get from here to there without any of this other stuff occurring? "Oh, we're really good at what we do." No, it doesn't work that way. You've got no corner in the market for being good in multifamily. There are so many good operators out there. How are you going to get that additional 10% rent, and how are you going to account for it? So that's the difference. That's the key here with that category. Now, listen, I call it loss to lease. Do you know what the flip side is? The flip side is what's called gain to lease. That means that if the market rents 1,000 and I'm selling my units for 1,100, I've got $100 gain to lease. I was doing a podcast, or actually it was a show the other day where I was analyzing someone's property. And I jumped on CoStar and I pulled up a bunch of information about the property, and I saw that this guy's rent that he's collecting is $100 a month higher than the market. He has a gain to lease on his financials. Now you ask yourself, is that good? Well, is it? Is it good? Well, the answer is not necessarily. You see, because if the market turns, the first people who are going to lose money will be those properties that have been renting their units at a gain to lease number. And banks don't like to see gain to leases on a property because they think the same exact way. So keep that in mind. You want to get to that potential income, and you've got to take into consideration, what is it going to take to get me there?